data stream that goes back and forth, and you can actually measure when this data stream stops, and then you know that whoever played the game stopped playing the game. And this is applicable especially for wireless networks. Now to what I got ahead of myself before. Now, the network DRM, for most parts, are cumbersome and a failure. So let's start over with a semi-blank sleeve and look at a different approach. And that's what game publishers did. And that's where the social DRM comes in. Because apart from having the DRM components, you also try to use the social media and the aspects of that to have psychological reason for actually buying games and sharing games with other people. The only problem here is this is also for content delivery, and therefore you have this whole tail of additional privacy-relevant information that now gets tagged onto your games. Specifically, you've got everything we talked about in the network DRM, but you also got user account information, and what is really interesting here is when you deeply look into what kind of privacy information you have actually, or personal information you've got to reveal is, you, at least for me, whenever they ask me for my date of birth, I'm like, why? Why do you want to know my date of birth? There's a lot of havoc you can wreak with my date of birth. And so, for all official purposes, I'm born on the 1st of April 1980, which is not my real birth date, but that could eventually bite me in the ass if there's really something that they need to check and I forget about this. They also want your address and so on, but this gets even worse because you have to have payment information with this. Because remember, digital content delivery, you don't want to send them a check and then receive your digital download. You give them a credit card number or your PayPal account. Then you also have got a purchase history because you want to know what you have to know what you actually purchased, and you have got a friend network because that's when the social content ties in. And this expands because the social content also includes the new thing that is really hip, which is achievements or badges. And I use these abstractly, so these are not copyrighted terms, if they are even copyrighted. The main point of this is you get little tokens for actually achieving something or doing something in the game that would either be not normal or is like a little bit a goodie. Because people like to be rewarded. But these rewards also allow you to create a very accurate game history. I can look at when you got these achievements and build up a pattern of when you're at home playing and when you are very likely not at home playing, and I can clean out your living room and steal your Xbox or PS3 or what have you. I also can create a behavior profile because for a lot of games you have, or more and more games these days try to give you ethical choices. Let's think about like BioWare games or even like Fable, for example. You have the good choice and the bad choice, and both of them typically have achievements. Now, fast forward like 10 years from now and you have like a whole history of this. If I always chose the bad achievements and the evil achievements and my boss sees that because there's tie-in with the next thing to your bigger social network, then that could be a problem. I mean, I'm looking a bit forward here. But very simply put, you can also have the single player versus multiplayer, hardcore versus casual. Do you really want to hire the guy that has a gamer score of 150,000? He's probably not going to be productive. He's just going to play all the time. And then I also have got a gaming location. In general, this just gives you a whole wealth of data. And I won't name the social DRM network that does this, but there is one that actually gives you achievements down to the second. If you just create a dummy account and browse through other accounts, the only thing you need to know is the username, and you can by the second figure out what happened. And this is not necessarily something that makes me feel warm and fuzzy. The next big thing is obviously integration with other social media, because you want to, for whatever reason, have the people from Facebook that you have said hi to once at a bar when you were really drunk and added them. You want them to know when you got your next achievement on, let's say, your Xbox, because that seems to be hip. So you now link into this profile that already exists all of the previously inaccessible information, your pictures, who your parents are, what your other friend network is. And this is in two levels here, because first of all, you're bringing that network into your gaming world, which you might want to keep separate. But you're also now giving the game publishers and the game developers that you don't necessarily trust perhaps as much as your bank, or perhaps you trust them even more, your whole social network. So this all blends together and everybody has access to everything. So for me, I feel a bit like I'm being watched by Batman, like in the most recent Batman game. And when you look at the case study for social DRM, it becomes a bit more obvious, concrete, what is actually revealed here. And I just want to say I like Blizzard and I don't want to bash on them. But the Battle.net has introduced a couple of additional privacy features that I was like, what is this? So just to give a quick explanation, the Battle.net is, and now called like to some extent the Real ID system, is an account needed for the install and for playing specific games that Blizzard releases. And it's kind of understanding that you need an account with personal information for MMOs like World of Warcraft, but for StarCraft and Diablo it's kind of an additional add-on to convince you to not steal the game. At some point this was also considered for official posts, for the official post in the forum, but there was such an outcry that it was removed. That just happened recently. The main point that Blizzard tries to make here is that it's not needed for single player, but on the other hand there's the statement that if you don't use it, you don't get a lot of the cool stuff, whatever that means. So you're probably gonna want it, especially if you want to be in the beta. So let's walk through the sign up. And this is basically what you can just verify through the website. So the very first piece of information that you have to reveal about yourself is your date of birth. And this is something that I'm not sure if I'm the only one here, but it really ticks me off when the first thing they want to know, if at any point in time they want to know my date of birth. Because the question here should be, are you an adult? Yes, no. And that should be all. There's no reason they need my date of birth, but that's the first thing you need to reveal about yourself. Then you reveal email address, full name, full address, phone number, and then you have payment information and so on attached to this. You obviously eventually create a friend list, bring your friends in, and what's interesting here is that your friends and the friends of your friends are listed with your real name. Now, this might change as the Battle.net matures, but at the moment that's just happening. To some extent this is optional, because I mean you can choose never to add any friends. But do we really want to be the loser that has 0 friends? The other thing obviously here is, as this grows, and we have seen with this with Steam, you've got a game list. So there's some additional information here. And then you've got an achievement history, because achievements are all hip. Now, looking at this social media and all of the DRM that we have talked about, it's relatively straightforward to mess with a gamer, as we've probably already seen. But I want to make this precise. DRM is in essence an unofficial point of failure. So if you don't like somebody, for example, you have played with this kid and he just beats you multiple times and you think he's a freaking cheater because he beat you, nobody can beat you, now you're just gonna screw with him. That's your point for the next week. You might not even have to screw with him too much, because we have this artificial point of failure where you have network connection that are inherently unreliable, and you might already have network restrictions like firewalls or antivirus that might already interfere with your DRM. But the bandwidth already could be so small, and that's literally a problem with the Ubisoft DRM, where if you have a small pipe, you might run into trouble and might not be able to play it. And when you then attack such a system that is kind of on the breaking point of failing, that it is relatively trivial. And what you can do here is obviously inject local traffic into the local network if you sit there locally. But the other thing is also you can interfere with the wireless network and you can DDoS the server, and that's what happened with Ubisoft. And this is actually a more difficult aspect to control, because you could not even be playing the game and you just want to make 500 gamers scream out in pain. Then you DDoS the Ubisoft server and watch them all cringe. One thing that a lot of people don't think about, and when you really look at these games, is registration keys are also a problem, because they're vulnerable in the end. First of all, I could steal somebody's key. Like, let's say malware lifts your whole user directory, I could reverse engineer and see what your key is and post it on a forum. This key is most likely going to get banned. But where it becomes more problematic because, I mean, to some extent, just don't get malware, right? But if you then think about the aspect that somebody reversed engineered the key algorithm and is now generating keys, if you've got a key collision with a valid key out there and that key gets registered, it will probably result in a permaban eventually as well when they detect that they've been installed on 2 different machines that shouldn't be associated. And I kind of imagine that it's really difficult to tell a service representative on the phone, hey dude, I never gave this key out, I bet it was a key gen that conflicted with mine. You probably just have to buy the game anew. Accounts are also vulnerable because when you think about this, they're just secured with a password, and there might be additional security on top of that, like Blizzard is doing, for example, for WoW, and that's where a lot of like the additional security comes in because MMOs are getting hacked and hacked more, at least accounts for them. But fundamentally, humans are not good with passwords, and so there will always be a problem on this side. But then the reset questions that you have for these passwords, if you should have not played it for ages and forgotten it, can be guessed as well, because think back to what I said before, the social networks like Facebook and so on will and have been partially tied in already. So the question of what's your hometown is right there on your profile. What's your mother's maiden name? I can probably look up her Facebook page, and additional, like what was your first dog, you'll probably find that out as well. So when I see these questions, especially for like banking sites and stuff, but this is also like a lot of assets are here, it really ticks me off. And there's not necessarily an easy answer to make this better, except for custom questions, but then people will just be like, what's your hometown? And you've got the same problem again. The other thing that you can do if you're really evil and malicious and you don't mind to talk to people on the phone or over email for a while is initiate a false, this account has been compromised action, where you basically say, hey, this is my account. I can't prove to you that it's my account because it has been hacked, but could you please block this until I can show you that this is really my account? The real user of this account will not be able to play until this is resolved, and this could take a couple of days. And I won't name the gaming platform, but I had something similar happen to me, and it took 5 days to get my account back, and I couldn't play any games. And I just felt like I was being treated by an automatic machine that every like 24 hours would be like, yes, we are still here working on it, and that was all I got. So, especially if all your games are on one platform, you run into problems. Then the thing that will be really hard to find out unless you have a whistleblower is accounts can be compromised on the back end too. I'm pretty confident that I didn't give out my password for this account that in question that I had the experience with that was actually compromised. So my guess is that there might have been something on the back end, or it was just like dumped from some disgruntled employee, you don't know. But this will not be publicly admitted, but you should also consider that this will probably the most likely leakage of privacy data that you can have in this whole system. Now, we have talked about all of these chunks that you can use to basically mess with a gamer. Now let's do a specific game study, and I picked the Ubisoft DRM because it's really easy to mess with that thing. You've got a couple of methods. Basically, it depends where you sit on the network. If you sit locally, it's obviously significantly easier and you can make it targeted, but you can also do it remotely. So locally, let's assume for a second that they have a wireless network. Then it becomes really easy. You basically just inject packets into that wireless network, and that theoretically works if you are sitting on a LAN too, but you might have to inject way more packets to screw with them. But ultimately, their router is probably going to keel over because who of us hasn't experienced that wireless routers or routers in general are not very stable. And so you just dump a ton of data on it and hope for it to overheat. For wireless, you can also do the disassociation attacks, which might not necessarily kill their whole connections, but it might make it unstable enough so you really run into problems. And we are just talking about barely dual-digit drop rates, and you're in trouble here. The remote method is a bit more complicated. It depends where you sit on the network. If you sit close enough, then you can probably do TCP reset attacks and SSL replay attacks. And the SSL replay attacks here kind of interesting because most of these connections are configured that if you have a replay, you have to fully renegotiate, and that sometimes takes long enough so that it will drop out of the game. But